Yuri Maltsev, Professor Yuri Maltsev, Dr. Yuri Maltsev, earned a BA and an MA from Moscow State University, a Ph.D. in labor economics at the Institute of Labor Research in Moscow, Russia. He defected to the United States in 1989. He is now a professor of economics at Carthage College in Wisconsin, and he joins us now to sound the alarm about what socialism really means and the horrors it would be visiting upon the United States if we were to adopt it. Professor, very good to talk to you, sir. Thank you for the time. How are you?
Well, I'm doing well, and thank you for inviting me.
It is a pleasure. It's rare to get an opportunity to speak with an economics expert like yourself who has seen up close and personal what socialized medicine looks like, what socialism in general in an economy looks like, rather than seeing it from a distance. You know, we sit here in the safety and comfort of the capitalist free market United States, and we look at Venezuela, and we look at communist Cuba, and we look at the Soviet Union and now Russia, and we can try to get an idea, but you've been there, you have seen it up close and personal, and that's why your perspective is so important. Dr. Maltsev, tell me what you think of when you hear Bernie Sanders, a self-avowed socialist and a longtime communist sympathizer, promising socialized medicine in the United States.
Well, he looks exactly like an unreformed Stalinist. And he really scares me. I mean, that so many people are willing to vote for that kind of clown. This is really sad, because I am too old to defect again, and definitely he is trying to destroy this country. And that's what they do. I mean, socialism never worked and will never work again. But that's what the Russians would say, that the only lesson of history is that it does not teach us anything.
That's a very great point. To call him or to say he looks like an unreformed Stalinist, I think that's very well said. What does a reformed Stalinist look like?
Reformed Stalinist sounds like reformed Nazi or reformed fascist or reformed... Right. It's not much of the reform. I mean, he is all the time like a parrot. He is repeating on and on that he is a democratic socialist. And democratic, it's an oxymoron. You're either not democratic or you're not a socialist. So there is no such a combination, because and Marx understood that, and Lenin understood that if you want to steal everybody's property, if you want to turn free men into slaves, that people would fight back. And that's not a democracy. That means that you need to kill. And that's how they were killing people. Tens of millions. In the 20th century, in Russia and Soviet Union alone, anywhere from 43 to 61 million people were murdered or starved to death or frozen to death in Siberia. So this is a record. And he doesn't have anything else to offer.
Dr. Maltsev, I want to talk a little bit more about his labeling of democratic social. I think you're right. It is an oxymoron. I think it is simply a label that he uses for the purposes of politics to make it look and sound a little bit more palatable. He's trying to convince a voting public that you can be a little bit pregnant, that you can be a little bit socialist, but also a little bit capitalist. That doesn't exist. Can you explain for people who don't understand the difference between socialism and communism? You referenced Lenin, of course. Lenin is well known for saying that the goal of socialism is communism. Can you explain the difference between socialism and communism, removing his label of, quote, democratic?
Yes, and Mr. Sanders, he is also Comrade Sanders, I would call him, that he all the time is pointing at Denmark or Sweden as socialist countries, which they are not. And the reason is because Marx, he defines socialism as abolition of private property. So you don't have private property. You don't have even property in yourself. The government is telling you what to do, and the government owns you. So that's what socialism is. Communism is an idea. It's a carrot which never was practiced. There was no communism in the world, because what communism would be, that would be withering away of the state. So there will be no state. Why? Because you don't need to govern people. People will be such angels that they will self-govern themselves. Then the money would wither away. There will be no money in that kind of society. And people would work as hard as they possibly can and consume as little as they possibly can. And this is a kind of a communist utopia. Even Friedrich Engels, the best buddy of Karl Marx, he asked him when does he think this communism would come. And Marx said 400 or 500 years from now. So we still are on the waiting list for 200 or 300 years. So communism is this wonderful kind of utopia, which I think was invented by Marx to lure people into believing that that's where we're getting to. But socialism, which they practice, socialism is also abolition of private property, and it's public slavery. It's public slavery and as disgusting as private slavery is, but it was not as deadly as public slavery, because slaves by the government are considered not only an asset but a liability as well. So they would, speaking about socialized healthcare, say Hitler, he was just killing people who were unfit or infirm or whatever, or had mental diseases. In the Soviet Union, they would just not admit that publicly. They were killing people by denying them health care. And then if you are over 60, because over 60 you can retire, you'll be considered a social parasite. And they would just deny you health care. I mean, they will give you maybe aspirin or things like that, and they will treat you kind of nicely in verbal way. But they would never perform expensive surgeries on you or things like that.
We are talking with Dr. Yuri Maltsev. He is an economics professor at Carthage College in Wisconsin, and if you cannot tell by his accent, he is a Soviet, or a Russian, I should say, by birth. He defected to the United States in 1989. He has seen the economies of socialist nations up close and personal, experience them. Doctor, I want to go back to what you started to say about Sweden and Denmark, Finland, etc., the Nordic or Scandinavian countries, because what we hear from people who hear us condemning the conditions in Venezuela, for example, is they say, why are you focusing only on Venezuela, where socialism has led to rampant starvation and disease and lack of basic human rights and human needs, etc.? Why are you focusing there? Why don't you focus on the socialized countries in the Nordic countries or Scandinavian countries? And I've often said that's because these are not true socialist nations. You referred to that briefly. Can you go further on that?
Yes, of course, it's obvious that Venezuela, Cuba, say Vietnam, these are Laos, these are socialist countries where there's no private property, where people do not own themselves. The government owns them. These are typical socialist countries. When you talk about Denmark or Sweden or Norway or Finland, they are not socialist countries, period, because they have a regime of private property. These are market economies. And when Mr. Sanders, he said that Denmark is the best example of a socialist country, then Jan Rasmussen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, next day he was on TV saying, don't badmouth Denmark. We are not a socialist country. We are a free market democracy. And that's exactly what they are. And the only thing what our socialists are pointing at them as a kind of like as a proof that socialism works, is that they have a full-blown welfare state. However, having said that, some of them, like Sweden right now, is more free than the United States. They have public choice available to everyone. Everyone can put his or her children in the school of their choice. And it can be any kind of school. It can be a Lutheran school, Catholic school, Muslim, Jewish school, whatever school of their preferences. So this is one thing. Another thing that they are trying right now to privatize their medical system. In Sweden already they privatize the pharmacies. And that's kind of a big step forward. And people are tired of paying these huge taxes of about 50-60%. So they are not socialists. They would be very upset if you call them socialists.
That is a fascinating point. I did not know that Sweden was in the process of privatizing their health care and their prescriptions, their drugs, etc. Meanwhile, here we are in the greatest economy, free market capitalist economy in the history of human civilization, trying to do the opposite. Barack Obama for 8 years tried to do just the opposite, taking it from private medicine to public medicine. And now, of course, with the promises made by so many of the Democratic candidates, especially Bernie Sanders, to to eliminate all private health care. What does that say about us? What does that say about the fact that this man is popular here in the United States when you see nations like Sweden going in the exact opposite direction?
I'm sorry to say that. Maybe that's a pretty kind of critical assessment of where we are. But I'm afraid that the people who are on the side of liberty, on the side of freedom, are losing the battle with our educational system. Educational system, it raises people who are applauding and voting for people like Bernie Sanders, who, you say, in the Soviet Union or anywhere else, would not be even listened to because they already went through this. And and what he is doing, he is sowing social envy left and right all the time, that we are in the process of some kind of class warfare, that we need to eliminate billionaires or whomever else. And this is the most ridiculous thing. However, socialists, that's the only claim for them for power is social envy, that somebody else is doing better than you. And this is not an American way at all. The people would praise people who are successful. Not anymore. Now in schools, in universities, they teach that the rich people are bad for some reason, that it's kind of like a zero-sum game, that they're rich because some other people are poor, and the poor people are poor because they're rich, which is not true in economic sense.
Dr. Maltsev, just two more questions. Number one, I want to go back to the issue of killing and about enslaving the people and essentially killing the people. You're right. I think a lot of people have pointed out that socialism is responsible for well over 100 million deaths in the last century. President Reagan, about 26 years before he became president, gave a speech when he was working on the Goldwater campaign, and he said that, and I'm paraphrasing, governments cannot control economies. Governments can only control people. And when the government sets out to control people, they do so by force and coercion, the kind of force that we're talking about that leads to the deaths of millions. Is that an apt thing to bring up in 2020? I feel like in 1964 when he said that, he was looking into a crystal ball because this is what we're on the verge of adopting.
Absolutely. I mean, he was absolutely right on the money in 1964, and this is the truth today. And the reason they kill, the reason they coerce, the reason that all socialist regimes would be despotic and would be dangerous and murderous is that socialism does not have any incentive. I mean, in the market economy, you are working to get a better home, to get a better car, to better your family, to do whatever you like to do. That's what Adam Smith was telling us. Under socialism, because of the equality of results, there is no incentive to do anything. And the only way the government can rule is by threatening people with death, threatening them with violence, with coercion, sending them to Siberia or any other place. That's the reason that socialism is so deadly.
Dr. Maltsev, last question. This does not have to do with socialism per se, but since I have a professor of economics on the air, I figured I should use this. It's timely. You're seeing our stock market crumble. Well, I shouldn't say crumble, but it has taken huge hits in the last few days. People are very concerned about the effect of the worldwide coronavirus on the American economy. Can you just give us a snapshot of what you think is going to happen to the American economy as a result of this worldwide potential pandemic?
I would think that this pandemic thing is used and abused by the socialists who right now are in Democratic Party to scare people to do all this, because usually if it's election year, then the best thing to deal with incumbent and the President Trump and his administration is to scare people about something else. So I think it is used by these people, this pandemic or whatever. I don't see any pandemic yet. I think the president gave a wonderful press conference yesterday about this, and it's not much ado about nothing, because we don't know whether it's nothing or not. But from another hand, I am watching a lot of foreign news and foreign televisions, and I can say that this is so exaggerated. That, for example, the death toll even from this coronavirus is almost more or less the same as of the flu that we have every year. So it's not that 100% of people would die. the mortality rate is below 1%. So it's not the same kind of things. I mean, clean yourself. I mean, wash your hands, have hand sanitizer, get vitamin C, try to avoid hugging and handshakes.
Right.
I mean, this is a simple thing which definitely should not lead the economy to fall apart. But because there are people who want the economy to fall apart. You remember maybe what his name is, Meyer, a comedian who was saying that we should ruin this economy to prevent re-election of Trump.
Oh, Bill Maher, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, yes. And that's how they feel. I mean, they don't care about how many people would die of coronavirus or how it would be happening or whatnot. They just hate Mr. Trump more than anybody else. And this is true communist hatred. If you will refer to Stalin or Lenin or Trotsky, the hatred over there was overwhelming. And I see the same hatred at the Democratic debate.
Never let a good crisis go to waste. It's kind of their motto. Yeah, and they're using this one and trying to take great advantage of it politically. Dr. Maltsev, it's an honor, it's a privilege, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. We may be calling on you again if you are open to that, because this is very valuable information.
Of course. Yes, I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope to be on your program again.